ahead, Vincent.
Okay. Now, welcome to you all for the first meeting of our special interest group in planetary technology. My name is Vincent Blok, and together with Jochem Zwier, we are from Wageningen University, and we are organizing this special interest group for the Society of Philosophy of Technology. A special welcome to Frederik Neirath as our first speaker, and also to Peter Lemmens, who was willing to provide a sort of co-referee after the presentation by Frederik. I just want to say a few words about the background of the whole idea about this special interest group, so that before we start, and then I will give the floor to Jochem, who will introduce you to the meeting of today and will facilitate the discussion and all that kind of things. But maybe a few words to start. Peter and I developed a workshop that was the starting point for this whole idea of this special interest group. Is that a few years back in the SPT conference in Lille, we organized a panel on the end of the world in philosophy of technology. So I'm not sure whether you are familiar with all the literature that is published in this area, but for instance, a philosopher like Timothy Morton, for instance, argues that in the Anthropocene there is no room for the concept of world anymore. There is an end of the world, while other philosophers like Clive Hamilton argue on the contrary, that, for instance, the Anthropocene calls for the creation of a new world. And we were thinking it is very strange that in the area of philosophy of technology, this whole debate about the end of the world, the role of world, and the role of technology in planetary systems like the Anthropocene is relatively under development, while in other fields of philosophy, this is a topic that is central. So that was the reason why we thought we wanted to start a panel, and Peter was there, I was there, Branislav, one of the speakers later on in this series, was also present. And that was quite a success. It resonated a lot with a lot of people. So we thought maybe we can continue our discussions and broaden a little bit the perspective of philosophy of technology by connecting it with insights in contemporary continental philosophy and environmental philosophy. And that was the starting point for this series that we organize. And yeah, I'm also very happy and proud that we were able to attract key figures in this and related fields. The first one is then Frederik Neirath, who wrote an important book, and Jochem will tell us a little bit more about it in a moment. But in the next coming 2 years, we will have bi-monthly meetings. This is the first one in which we invite what we call a superstar in philosophy, like Frederik, but also next in March we have Clive Hamilton. Later on we have Graham Harman and many others who will join us in our discussions about this topic. So what I hope is that you see this as an invitation for, if you are a philosopher of the environment, to engage with philosophers of technology. If you are a philosopher of technology, to engage with environmental philosophers, learn and get inspiration from each other. And that is the main purpose that we have in mind. And with this, I think it is good to give the floor to Jochem to introduce our guest today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vincent. Let's see, maybe in the meanwhile, while I'll give some procedural remarks and introduce the speaker, maybe Frederik, you can already start to try and share your presentation. There should be on the top right a share button that you should be able to use. If not, I have a backup of your presentation as well. As to the procedures today, so we have over 140 registrations for this series now, and I see that there are about 40 people here. So the usual thing with raising the digital hands via Teams won't work that well, probably. So I propose we do the following: that during Frederik's lecture and also during Peter's response, please type your questions that you want to raise in the chat. Type them as briefly as possible. I will moderate the chat and then read out your question to Frederik. He can then respond, and then you get one follow-up question where you can unmute yourself. And I think in this way we can, on the one hand, have a bit of a fleshed out discussion, while on the other hand accommodating as many questions as we can. And then we'll just have to see how we take it from there and how we do on time and so on. So yeah, please type your questions in the chat, and then I think that will work. That said, I would...
maybe can share the PowerPoint, because it's the first time I use actually Microsoft Teams video stuff, and I don't find it is a share tray, I guess, right? But I found the button, but I cannot access my documents. I don't know why. If you can do it, but maybe it's problematic. I don't know. Maybe there's something I don't understand for sure.
There's also a good chance that something is not working. So let me boot up your...
if it's okay, all your screens should appear below. That's what happens to me, at least. If I choose sharing, open the sharing. Yeah, I have a Dutch word, so...
Yeah, but so there is... Yes. What should happen? You say, I'm very sorry, Peter, you said...
Yeah, what happens to me is that all my screens appear at the bottom of my screen, and then I can choose one. But I think you already have it.
No, I am now sharing the presentation, so what you can just do, Frederik, is ask me for the new slide, and then I think that will work, because you can also see the presentation now, correct?
There is something called request control. Should I request control?
Yeah, you could try that.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Then I'll do allow.
Yeah.
So now you can control my computer and see all my hidden documents, correct?
It means I can control it now. I can like change slides.
I think so. And otherwise you can just ask me.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm sorry, thank you.
No worries, no worries. So let me then introduce our speaker for today. Frederik Nijot, Mellon Mordridge Professor of Planetary Humanities at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the US. As I'm sure a lot of you know, he's the author of various books, including the ones that I have at least here are Utopia's Manifesto for Radical Existentialism. I think this was 2017. And of course, The Unconstructible Earth, An Ecology of Separation, which is one of the reasons why we invited Frederik to our lecture series. I'm sure many of you have already read the book, and it makes perfect sense. Made perfect sense to invite you to this particular seminar series on this theme. His most recent book is Le Cosmos de Walter Benjamin, Un communisme de Lointain, which was published last year. And I suspect, or I expect, that an English translation will appear at some point, but I'm not sure about that. As Vincent just mentioned, Frederik is joining us from San Francisco today, where it's very early. So I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that we very much appreciate you getting up early and getting some extra coffee in order to join us here. His lecture is called The Earth as a Phobic Object, Negative Ecology and the Rise of Global Eco-Fascism. Frederik, thanks again for joining us. We look very much forward to your talk. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jochem. So I want to say that right now I see the PowerPoint, like the first image, the first slide, but I cannot see myself. That's no big deal. That's not a bad thing in a way, because it's very early in the morning and I have a cold. So I will use some planetary, technology to help me. but I cannot see anyone. So I just want to say that for now, it's like I am speaking just in front of my computer, facing my PowerPoint without any images of anybody else. So I hope you can see me. I cannot control my image. And again, that's not a bad thing in a way, but I wanted to share this very specific situation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
All right. So let's go. In my talk, and you can go, I think I cannot control so maybe I can do something like that with my finger. It's a very strange, but if you can go towards the next slide. Yes, thank you. So in my talk, I want to trace the relation between two hypotheses. First, that the Earth has become a phobic object. Second, that ecofascism, which feeds on phobic attitudes towards the Earth, looms at the horizon of planetary politics. My reasoning is the following, which I will condense into 5 points before developing them in the 2 first sections of my talk, the first devoted to environmental collapse and the second to ecofascism. Next slide, please. The deterioration, if not the collapse, of the planetary environment seems more and more unavoidable. Next one. Governments, which are made up of people who obviously read the newspapers and who have heard about the IPCC reports, do not deny the seriousness of the environmental situation. They know it, and their political choices depend on that knowledge. Next one. As every year's annual UN climate conference proves, governments do not seem to lean toward an attempt to really stop the causes of climate change, loss of biodiversity, the acidification of oceans, etc. Next one. If governments gave up only on any serious economic, political, or ecological attempt to tackle the causes of environmental disasters, then they will have to try to deal with their unavoidable effects: famine, riots, and several sorts of social unrest, economic uncertainty, the exponential increase in the number of environmental refugees, and the nationalist xenophobic surges coming from it. Next one. To prevent these social effects from happening, to be able to manage them, even to take advantage of them, governments will proactively undo democracy. Hence what I call ecofascism, that is to say, next one, a new form of fascism that is not first based on the substance-based idea of race or nation, but on a rejecting relation to the environment insofar as the deterioration of the latter, judged unavoidable, threatens the social and economic order, which can be called, without emphasis, capitalism. Next one. Ecofascism does not aim at preserving the biosphere, but at preserving a group or a class from the collapsing biosphere. In this regard, what I call ecofascism is not exactly what the Zetkin Collective and Andreas Malm call fossil fascism, in the sense that A, ecofascism to me does not primarily originate from a far-right frame of thought, and B, its relationship to the environment takes precedence over its relationship to fossil fuels. The specific form of relation that ecofascism has to the environment is clearly a negative one. In the ecofascist frame, the environment is a sort of phobic object, an object of fear and distrust that has to be contained. In the third section, I will propose a genealogy of this phobic relation, which I call negative ecology. Next one. If ecofascism uses the collapse of the ecosphere as a political tool for producing an authoritarian regime, negative ecology reveals a psychological tendency to paradoxically reject what we know perfectly well cannot be rejected, namely our terrestrial ties, our embodied condition on Earth, our material relation with the ecosphere as living, breathing, and feeling beings. Of course, modernity might be partially defined as the anthropocentric form of society built against the non-human world, as human exceptionalism, that is, as a form of denial of our terrestrial belonging. But, and that's the point I want to highlight, negative ecology paradoxically recognizes the environmental reality while trying to neutralize it, to stay away from its frightening reality. At the very modern place where there was an ontological divide based on the rejection of relations to the environment, ecofascism builds political and technological walls that do not deny the environment, but include it as the central element of a new form, a global form of governmentality. And this inchoate form of governmentality has a negative ecology, so a phobia of the environment, as its central paradigm. Negative ecology can consequently be defined as a pathology of otherness, the otherness of the Earth, of any terrestrial reality, human bodies, and even, viruses. In the fourth section, I will argue that to heal from ecophobia, we need to create terrestrial alliances. And think here about a recent book written by Léna Ballot and Antoine Chopeau called Nous ne sommes pas seuls, We Are Not Alone. It was published by Seul last year. And when I speak about terrestrial alliances, I lean on this important book. Formed at the occasion of political struggles against the building of a pipeline, like in North Dakota recently, or of an airport, like in Notre-Dame-des-Landes in France, as I explained in the fourth section, these terrestrial alliances might be a good social basis to redirect technology. And really, the goal of this talk is really a step toward an attempt to rethink technology. As philosopher Walter Benjamin helps us understand in the fourth section, technology should not be seen as a tool used to master nature and vanquish it, but as a mediation helping us to re-symbolize our relationship with the planet, that is to say, also with ourselves as planetary beings, or as Spivak wrote in her first theorization of planetarity. Instead of speaking about planetary subjects, she was using the expression planetary accidents, and I think we are planetary accidents. Okay, so next slide on collapsology. And I refer here to two books recently translated and published in English, How Everything Can Collapse, and Another End of the World is Possible, Living the Collapse and Not Merely Surviving It. The argument of these two books is the following. Because of the global rise of temperature, loss of biodiversity, the infertility of soils, water scarcity, peak oil, and other depletions, the collapse of our civilization is unavoidable and unmanageable. Every possibility that we might conceive as a way to avoid the planetary collapse is delusional. One might contemplate, for example, sources of energy able to replace oil like solar energy or even nuclear plants. But the authors argue that to develop any alternative energy in a global context, one needs oil to transport raw materials and workers through the world, for instance. The thermo-industrial civilization is a trap. We cannot escape it. And when we try to escape it, we strengthen the causes leading to global collapse. We cannot, à la Hans Jonas or à la Jean-Pierre Dupuis, use the worst-case scenario as an exhortation to act in the present to prevent the worst-case scenario from happening. Given according to them, the inevitability of global collapse, we should consequently grieve the futures we had dreamed about, futures of progress, easy life, and smartphones, and to modify our representation of human society and of the other than humans. against the individualist and competition-oriented schema at the core of any survivalist strategy. They insist, leaning on the anarchist thinker Kropotkin, on mutual aid and solidarity, that is to say, on the positive aspects of a moral shift that our current civilization makes invisible. We should not imagine that the authors of these influential books just speak for themselves. And the more I think about collapsology, the more I see that in a way everybody is a collapsologist this way. Even Macron is a collapsologist. Putin is also in a way a collapsologist. The idea that the future is rapidly dissolving into global warming is a reason for which movements like Youth Climate Movement or Extinction Rebellion recently emerged and became very popular for good reasons. These movements are not millenarian. Their members do not use an apocalyptic religious vocabulary. They use the vocabulary of scientists, of the IPCC's reports to show that governments do almost nothing, or not enough for sure, to act on the causes of climate change. Thus, if knowledgeable, responsible citizens, pro-Kropotkin thinkers and activists are able to diagnose the gravity of the global environmental situation, it will be rationally indefensible to argue that CEOs, leaders of world organizations, and heads of state do not know how serious the situation is. Actually, and that's the important psychopolitical shift of the last decade, they know. But they have a different idea concerning the happy collapse that the authors of the collapsology theory try to privilege. They have another plan, a plan B, that is not about changing the political situation, but about escaping it. As journalist Evan Osnos explains in a famous 2017 article entitled Doomsday Prep for the Super Rich, and the next slide will be wonderful. Thank you so much for your help. Survivalism, and the next, maybe, yes, thank you. Survivalism, a difficult term to say for me, the practice of preparing for a crack-up of civilization. You can read it, I guess. You can see me now. The practice of preparing for a crack-up of civilization tends to evoke a certain picture. The woodsman in the tinfoil hat, the hysteric with a hoard of beans, the religious doomsayer. But in recent years, survivalism has expanded to more affluent quarters, taking root in Silicon Valley and New York City among technology executives, hedge fund managers, and others of their economic cohort. Hono's article documents how the very wealthy build underground bunkers with air filtration systems in Kansas or buy houses in New Zealand, which is supposed to be safer than other places in the world. Still democratic, self-sufficient in terms of food and energy, distant enough from everything else in the world to be protected from chaos, at least for a while. What Osno's article shows is that the financial elite does not think about how to avoid the causes of chaos, but, as I insist today, about being at least momentarily protected from its consequences. Would it be unreasonable to argue that this nihilistic state of mind is perhaps also at play at the political level? Hence, the second part of my talk, and the next slide, and a Kleenex. First, as I have already said, it would be almost impossible to imagine that everyone, from activists to hedge fund managers, knows, except prime ministers and presidents. It is even not necessary to be a Marxist to know that the political and the economical domains greatly intersect, to use a euphemism. After all, the French President Macron used to be an investment banker. So they know. Even when they seem to deny it, and they deny it less and less, and hence the reason for which I decided to write this text and to prepare this talk. They know, like Trump, calling global warming a Chinese hoax and also a total hoax, bullshit and pseudo-science, while trying to build seawall to protect his Ireland golf course from rising sea levels and water erosion. Even when they do not seem to acknowledge the anthropogenic origin of climate change, they know about its catastrophic consequences. They know, but they do not act, or not enough, or not quickly enough. Just one illustration, and you can just open, read a newspaper, you will have a confirmation, as we all know. The problem is not to understand what is going on, the problem is to know what to do with that, right? The majority of the carbon emission reduction pledges for 2030 that 184 countries made under the Paris Agreement, it was not so far away in the past, aren't nearly enough to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. I was reading this yesterday, the last issue of MIT Technology Review, an interesting journal, and there is a graphic, a map showing the consequences of the global situation with a 3 degrees Celsius temperature augmentation. And so, like, nobody is thinking about 2 degrees Celsius. The projections now deal with a 3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. Some countries won't achieve their pledges, and some of the world's largest carbon emitters will continue to increase their emissions, according to a panel of world-class climate scientists. Their report, The Truth Behind the Paris Agreement Climate Pledges, warns that by 2030, the failure to reduce emissions will cost the world a minimum of 2,000 billion per day in economic losses from weather events made worse by human-induced climate change. Hence what I call the ecofascism metapolitical hypothesis. We are now at the core of what I try to suggest. In the next slide, we can see Karl Polanyi saying the following thing. According to him, the fascist solution of the impasse reached by liberal capitalism in the 1930s can be described, I quote, it is on the slide, as a reform of market economy achieved at the price of the extirpation of all democratic institutions. But today, the impasse concerns first the ecological situation and only second the market economy as a correlate. Of course, we can discuss this point. By this order of priority, first the ecological, that's again, that's the hypothesis I try to build and to develop and to illustrate. I do not mean, of course, that what Polanyi calls market economy, or what we can call capitalism, is not responsible for the environmental degradation. I mean that the eco-fascist political aim is the following: dealing with the social effects of the environmental collapse while trying to maintain as much and as far as it is possible the development of the economy. In 1973, Ivan Illich was already imagining, and it is on the next slide, a managerial fascism, that is to say, a bureaucratic management of human survival. People, he wrote, could be so frightened by the increasing evidence of growing population and dwindling resources that they would voluntarily put their destiny into the hands of big brothers. It's like an air of déjà vu. Technocratic caretakers could be like the prophecy that now we can read again as with an air of déjà vu. Technocratic caretakers could be mandated to set limits on growth in every dimension, and to set them just at the point beyond which further production would mean utter destruction. Such a dystopia could maintain the industrial age at the highest endurable, and here we will need to insist and to comment on the term endurable, level of output. So what I call ecofascism is an authoritarian way to manage, as Illich says, the catastrophic consequences and not the causes of the collapse of ecospheres. Such ecofascism might be nationalistic, but not necessarily. It's true that the massacres in El Paso, Texas in August 2019 and in Christchurch, New Zealand in March 2019 demonstrated how anti-immigrant white nationalism can be reinterpreted by those who declare themselves as eco-fascists in terms of anti-refugee environmentalism, calling for mass murder to save trees. First, we can understand how classic forms of nationalism might use so-called protection of the environment as a way to protect the nation, even when this protection is non-existent or hides the mere will to increase the wealth of a class on the backs of the nation. Business as usual. But we also need to imagine a new form of nationalism, less based on the affirmation of a conquering national identity and the expansion of its Lebensraum, than on the survival of this identity in a collapsing world, in which water is going to be more and more a rare good as global warming leads to the evaporation of water and consequently makes it unavailable. One illustration of this new kind of nationalism, during the campaign for the 2019 European elections, it is on the next slide, Marine Le Pen, who is maybe, the next French president, so you have to be used to her name, the leader of the French far-rightist party, the Rassemblement National, argued during a political meeting that, I quote, the local must be given priority over the global. And really in this sentence, you have the essence of the shift at play in the ideology of the far right. I mean, the far right trying to get the state, to get state power. For Le Pen, the nation is less defined as a race than as one implementation of the local as an ecosystem. I still quote Le Pen's discourse. He is an environmentalist, An ecosystem that must be protected against migrants and refugees. And that's, at this moment, maybe she's not really an environmentalist, but protected against migrants and refugees seen as invasive species. The nation is thus less a substance like Blut und Boden than a sort of immunological protection able to secure the local, that is to say, non-global identity. Not that for the Rassemblement National ideology, the global is not openly at least, synonymous with cosmopolitanism, as it used to be the case in its ideology of the 1980s, but with what attacks the ecological, biological, and economic conditions of survival of the local. Hence, an emerging political function of the nation casts the nation not as a substantial center, but as a immunizing periphery. And on the next slide, there is something that I want to stress in this talk. In this developing ideology, nationalism would fulfill an immune function, more reactive than active, using ecological discourse to ensure not the maintenance of an identity, but of the material conditions of possibility for this identity to persist. Hence, new wars on the horizon. Not a living space, but a surviving space. So, ecofascism is not a kind of politics aiming at acting on the causes of ecological collapse, as I tried to say from the beginning of this talk, but rather at managing its consequences. This management demands a restructuring of governmentality to preserve the structure of domination. Ecofascism would then be a form of politics that in the future would be in charge of the strict rationing of food, energy resources, and modalities of access to transport and communication in a national framework where there will be no counterpower, only the omnipresent figure of someone who would stand for the despot. Even a kind despot, or even a woman. It is unclear that an eco-fascist government will need to be concerned about the population's health or subsistence. Next slide, please. Thank you. In times of ecological disasters, the survival of the group in power might depend on drones, robots, and artificial intelligence. Any biopolitical concern about health, hygiene, birth rate, and longevity being a mere waste of time and energy. Ecofascism would sign biopolitics death warrant. Consequently, the most likely kind of ecofascism will be the one trying to save the ruling class by eliminating or at least immiserating the rest of the population, only preserving the minimum number of people necessary for the technical maintenance of the capitalist technologies still capable of functioning after major ecological disruptions. Next slide, please. In this extreme form of ecofascism that perhaps only cinema has anticipated, but it will not be the first time, even nationalism would be a waste of time. That leads us to the next section and the next slide. The first section seems to, or the two first sections, seem to offer the following lesson. For the kind of eco-fascist politics I trace here, the main concern is not to preserve the environment, but to preserve a group from the environment. For this reason, I propose the concept of negative ecology, which I define first on the next slide as an attempt to build dams against the environment itself, in order to save the lives of privileged groups to the detriment of others. In this political frame, next slide, in this political frame, the others are those who are intentionally and blatantly exposed to environmental death, hence the necessity for a strong and maybe renewed environmental justice movement. If therefore ecofascism's ecology is negative, this is also because it denies others the right to live. Finally, I think that we can add a third meaning to the term negative ecology. If even national leaders, thank you, yeah, you are anticipating the next slide, it's perfect. If even national leaders recognize the threat of a civilizational collapse, then the fact that these leaders intentionally burned forests, like in Brazil recently, and every environmental rule, like in the USA, should be interpreted as a deliberate acceleration of environmental destructions, a way to accelerate the eco-fascist restructuring itself. I know I exaggerate a little bit because, of course, you know, à la Baudrillard, I push, you know, an hypothesis to its limits to imagine a sort of destruction that will be, in a way, even if it's not intentional, a way to accelerate the eco-fascist restructuring of governmentality. In this sense, the governments that were ruled by Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in the USA, and Duterte in Philippines, amongst others, can be considered as first steps towards the establishment of ecofascism. It is the avant-garde of ecofascism, the pioneers. Of course, I use this term intentionally. The reason for a possible eco-fascist contamination everywhere in the world is that the Earth, understood as Gaia, as the ecosystem of every ecosystem, seems to generate nothing except fear, or, to use this marvelous euphemism, eco-anxiety. This fear is global, even though one should not erase huge differences of perception and exposure depending on populations in question. Hence, environmental racism, that is to say, the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color, like placement of minority communities in proximity to toxic waste. Yet the fear circulates globally and creates a sort of social parataxis, by which I mean a juxtaposition of unmediated social realities, with, on the one hand, overexposure of minorities, racialized people, and on the other, overprotection, overexposure and overprotection. CEOs building bunkers, or Elon Musk dreaming about an escape to Mars or to Twitter. We are not sure any longer about the final destination of Elon Musk. I know it will be a terrible destination for us, but which one, we don't know. Maybe it should go to Mars. I know I would prefer in a way, as soon as possible. So overexposition and overexposure is the social parataxis that creates the conditions for ecofascism. This global fear perhaps explains why a thinker like Bruno Latour completely changed his philosophical perspective without explaining why. First, a lover of technology explaining why we should love our monsters, our artificial hybridized creatures, and reject any attempt to criticize technology. He became aware of the technological danger and describes Earth as, I quote, terrifying and a source of horror. Next slide, please. The Earth is more and more seen as a monster, Mother Earth turned into a ghoul, a nightmarish return of a repressed nature, and seems to still exist, at least in front of me. Climate change does not reveal Earth as a beast that we cannot tame, as Clive Hamilton explained, but as a Lovecraftian creature that we do not want to face any longer, Medusa longing for our gaze. Unable to find a mirror shield thanks to which we could see the Gorgon, we just prepare for a blind war against the Earth. The war against the Earth is for sure not something new, and should be understood as a perfect implementation of what Caroline Merchant called the death of nature, which is the military victory of the phallocratic rationalism that modernity has favored. Since the 17th century, the war against the Earth has had a specific goal, submitting the Earth to a will of reprogramming. For Descartes, nature is no longer, I quote Descartes, some deity or other sort of imaginary power, but matter itself, a flexible matter that we allowed ourselves to transform depending on our needs and fantasies. If, next slide, the book of nature, to borrow from Galileo Galilei, is written in geometrical language, mathematical language, and the Earth, as the terrestrial embodiment of nature, is a page with letters and figures that we can easily digitalize and reassemble in a new form, and Earth 2.0. Earth 2.0 is Earth mastered by the sons of Descartes, the programmers who conceived Google Earth, the geoengineers who nowadays promise to master the climate and kill nature for good. Killing nature and generating its digital resurrection are two sides of the same coin, two sides that we need to consider if we want to understand the other dimension of the war against nature. Not only its electronic resurrection, its 3D modeling and reprogramming, but also its exploitation, the extractivist economy leading to fracking and fires in the Amazonian rainforest. We might think that nature's mathematization, thanks to which science and technology can develop, underpins extractivism. Yes, but on a psychopolitical level, it is more useful, I think, at least it is an hypothesis, to highlight that it is the split between digitalization and extractivism that determines environmental collapse. And I say that on the next slide, but the more I argue the Earth is subjected, the more the Earth is subjected to its digital transmigration into a geoengineered Earth 2.0, the more the real Earth is seen as a remainder that one would like to flush, hoping that such a magic act would either reverse global warming or at least protect the class of magicians and their eco-fascist protectors. Sorry about that. But in parallel with the formation of the Capitalocene, or should we call it the Digitalocene, and it's not disinterested attempt to master the forces of nature. And environmental awareness rose up on the next slide. As historians Bonneuil and Fressos demonstrated, sensitivity to the environment did not suddenly appear in the 1950s with the birth of the US environmentalist movement. Environmental sensitivity has accompanied from the beginning the development of the capital scene, the fabrication of Watt's engine, and the spread of the Industrial Revolution. At the end of the 18th century, people were already thinking about the connection between climate change and deforestation, already in fierce opposition to deforestation, already writing petitions and creating associations denouncing industrial pollution and the maladies resulting from it. But next slide, what I call negative ecology is the terrible inversion of this awareness, not the mere production of a split between humankind and nature, that is to say, the production of an ontological form of exceptionalism withdrawing humankind from the rest of the world. You know, a large part of critical theory in the environment, large part of contemporary environmental thinking is an attempt to denounce and to criticize human exceptionalism. I think we are in another situation nowadays, because there is this pragmatic, concrete, cynical way to use environmental awareness as a form of authoritarian governmentality, assuming that a governmentality that does not really care for its population is not a mere flatus vocis.
You have 10 minutes. Okay, Frederick?
Oh, no, that's a no, that's a pure no. 15 minutes, certainly, yes. The reason for that form of cynical governmentality is that Earth 2.0 was not able to completely replace the real Earth. The digital was not completely able to become an offshore parallel universe. And cyberspace was not able to completely get rid of the effluvium coming from acidified oceans. Next slide. The digital has a leak which fuels negative ecology. What I am going to do is I'm going to skip the first part of the fourth part appearing on the next slide, and I will go directly. So I will not speak about terrestrial aliens. I will not speak about the French activists that I love. And I am going to speak about how to think about a way to put together these terrestrial alliances, because of my fear of localism. I think we have to basically, I jump to Benjamin, our savior. Basically, the idea is to reject accelerationism, that is to say, the idea according to which we should not be local and we should be immediately at the level of, at a planetary scale, and we should only think about how technology, if liberated, can save us. So I want to avoid the fetishism of technology, but I want also to avoid a sort of dangerous localism. So I am really thinking these days about that, how we can think together a new synthesis between the local and the global, thanks to this term, thanks to planetarity. The planetary as a way to re-symbolize the relation between the local and the global. I think we are many people nowadays trying to think that. But I jump not on Walter Benjamin, it would be very awkward, but I jump to the part devoted to his work. And I think it's not this. Can you please go to the next slide, and even the next one too? And we should, yeah, Benjamin is appearing as a ghost on the right part of the slide. Because I think he can help us, this philosopher, to sketch out a macro political perspective. Benjamin wrote several texts dealing with fascism, and he always connected fascism with a certain conception of technology and nature. Benjamin's thesis is the following. In fascism, war is thought of as an expression of an idealized, mysticized nature. And idealization also at stake in the fascist representation of the nation seen as natural and pure, that is to say, completely mythical. In Theory of German Fascism, Benjamin wrote the following about Germany during World War I. Next slide. Etching the landscape with flaming banners and trenches, technology wanted to recreate the heroic features of German idealism and its idealization of nature. But what really happened is, on the next slide, that technology in war gave shape to the apocalyptic face of nature and reduced nature to silence, even though this technology had the power to give nature its voice. War, in the metaphysical abstraction in which the new nationalism believes, is nothing other than the attempt to redeem mystically and without mediation the secret of nature understood idealistically through technology. This secret, however, can also be used and illuminated via a technology mediated by the human scheme of things. Again, the idealization of nature, which could be also identified as another root of what I have called the digital scene and its will to total virtualization of the world. Next slide. Benjamin imagines another use of technology, a technology that will neither silence nature nor give her an apocalyptic face. This opposition between two sorts of technology is also at stake in the work of art in the age of its technological reproducibility. In this text, Benjamin famously opposes the aestheticizing of politics that fascism practices and that culminates in one point war, with what he calls for the politicizing of art, that is to say, as Benjamin writes in the last line of his text, communism. What Benjamin calls the aestheticizing of politics is clearly linked to the idealization of nature and the nation that he was criticizing in his essay on German fascism. Next slide. In the aestheticizing of politics, technology is used to master nature, a mastery revealing its success in war, which sets a goal for mass movements on the grandest scale and mobilizes all of today's technological resources. But, next slide, through the politicizing of art, another function will be given to technology. The destruction caused by war furnishes proof that society was not mature enough to make technology its organ, that technology was not sufficiently developed to master the elemental forces of society. Mastering the relation between nature and human beings, next slide, instead of mastering nature, neither requires the extractivist nor the digital annihilation of the earth that we studied in the previous section, but a redirecting of society's elemental forces. Among these forces, next slide, one might identify the destruction that Freud named death drive. Redirecting our death drive, but also our capacity to take care of others and to defend what we love, will be only possible thanks to education, which Benjamin associates with technology, understood as a mediation between nature and humankind, and not as a tool for power. Let us imagine, next slide, a technology whose goal will not be to violently extract energy from the Earth, but to insert the Earth into the cosmos. Let us imagine a technology that will help us to perceive the correspondences between human beings and animals, plants, and stones, but also supernova, with whom we share some commonality. It is this kind of imagination that I would like to think now. And I go to the conclusion, very short, of my talk. And it is in the next slide. Yeah, I will not. Can you please go to the next one again and again? Yes, thank you. So very short conclusion. Will we be able to stop the development and the spreading of the negative ecology underpinning the eco-fascist future? Are we sure that even the social democrat regimes will not develop their own forms of eco-fascism, using police and the army to reject environmental refugees while building consent about eco-biopolitical rules on the national frame? My fear is that eco-fascism could spread everywhere, in blatant nationalist regimes, but also in authoritarian neoliberal democracies. The only way to prevent the eco-fascist contagion would be, according to me, to create planetary alliances, a new internationalism, or what I sometimes call an outer nationalism. Next slide. An outer nationalism, a non-modern, I insist on that, a non-modern form of internationalism that will have relinquished any sort of national hope. An outer nationalism would require more than local actions and would not be possible without technology. Instead of imagining either humanity without technology or a transhumanist type of post-humanity, I believe it is necessary to, next slide, and it will be the last one, necessary to rethink technology from the point of view of our planetary condition. By this, I mean our condition of beings open not only to their terrestrial situation, but also to the cosmological dimension exceeding their terrestriality. Time has come to become at last Copernican, and to pass from the Aristotelian phobia of the Earth to the love for the cosmos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for that fascinating lecture. Let me immediately move on to you, Peter. You prepared some questions, and to the others, yeah, please feel free to use the chat to pose any questions. And after Peter's comments, we can open the floor to everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jochem, and thank you, Frederick, for this very fascinating lecture, which I received only yesterday, and so I didn't have a lot of time to make responses. So they were very impulsive and maybe more reflect my current concerns about all kinds of things. And I have too much, so we have only half an hour. So I think I will skip a few questions. One was actually more empirical or scientific in nature about, let's say, the plausibility of the predictions of impending climate disaster and doom, right? Since the COVID crisis and since the way established science behaved, so to speak, I got more skeptical about the scientific establishment, right? And that also extended for me to climate science. And on the rebound, I started to read authors that I normally suspect, like Björn Lomborg and Stephen Koonin, and Michael Schellenberger. Oh, apologies, which are definitely not crackpots, but have, a more skeptical view on this impending disaster, right? But let's not go into that. Although I would be very interested in your view how COVID changed or should change our view on science and its corruption and co-optation by the forces of capitalism, etc., etc. And then another point, and it's a little bit related that I want to make, or rather a question I want to ask, is about the relation between your very interesting thesis on emerging ecofascism and the destruction of democracy promoted by today's elite and the so-called Great Reset, that many people nowadays talk about and that they suspect to be either behind the scenes or even an overt implementation of an authoritarian or even totalitarian agenda, either fascist, communist, or indeed radically neoliberal, that co-opts the climate crisis, but also the COVID crisis as an excuse and in the way of what Charles Eisenstein has called carbon reductionism and climate fundamentalism, to introduce all kinds of measures that diminish their freedom and rights as citizens and effectively stifle their ability to collectively decide about their own future, a future that they feel is taken away from them completely. And so how do you see your diagnosis that many of today's governments will proactively undo democracy, as you write, in order to curtail the freedom of their populations and contain the consequences of social unrest among the masses caused by environmental deterioration or collapse, a diagnosis that I fully share, by the way. How do you see this in the light of this so-called Great Reset, which is a view of the current political-economic conjuncture that is frequently ridiculed by academics, as you know, as a conspiracy theory? And I would like to hear about your view as a philosopher on conspiracy theories in general and their current rise in popularity in particular, because I personally think it is one of the most interesting developments also for philosophy of our current moment and something that we need to reflect upon as philosophers. Another question concerning the thesis of ecofascism. Are you, as someone seeing ecofascism appearing on the horizon, then an advocate of eco-socialism in the sense of eco-Marxists such as Andreas Malm, John Bellamy Foster, and Ian Angus? And if not, how would you characterize the macro-political response to the planetary crisis you prefer, and how does it differ from eco-socialism? A third point about negative ecology. You write that negative ecology reveals a psychological tendency to paradoxically reject what we know perfectly well cannot be rejected, namely our terrestrial ties, our embodied condition on Earth, our material relation with the ecosphere as living, breathing, and feeling beings. I would like to argue and question you that this relation is not only material, although that is very important, of course, but also existential, symbolic, and indeed spiritual. And that is precisely these relations that are denied by those who embrace a negative ecology. And does this negative ecology also resonate with what you have called geoconstructivism in your book, The Unconstructible Earth? And that is to say, with what you call its anaturalism and its denial of the existence and importance for humans of nature. Maybe you could elaborate a bit, if possible, on the relation between negative ecology and geoconstructivism, and also about negative ecology hangs together with what you call eco-constructivism in the same book, because that is far less clear to me, but maybe that's too much. My fourth question is about terrestrial alliances and planetary technology. You write that to heal from ecophobia, we need to create terrestrial alliances, and that these might be a good social basis to redirect technology. You write that technology should not be seen as a tool used to master nature and vanquish it, but as a mediation helping us to re-symbolize our relationship with the planet, that is to say also with ourselves as planetary beings. My question is, what is exactly meant by this re-symbolization, and how should the role of technology in this be understood exactly? And is it the task of terrestrial alliances on planetary technology only that of a re-symbolization? And do you mean with this something similar to what Hugh Huey theorizes as different cosmotechnics in the sense of different epistemps mediated by different technologies? And should it not only be about re-symbolization, but also include the development of a new, operational technical relation to the planet, maybe in the sense of what Peter Sloterdijk talks about when he writes about homeotechnics as a less dominating and more eco-friendly and cooperative form of techniques than the traditional allotechnics. And for your macro-political strategy against ecofascism, you appeal to Benjamin's conception of technology. Benjamin, you write, imagines another use of technology, a technology that would neither silence nature nor give her an apocalyptic face. Technology, in Benjamin's sense, would not be a mastery of nature, but a mastery of the relations between nature and man, and a mastery of the elemental forces. And then, of course, I'm thinking about Bernard Stiegler and the libidinal economy and the way this libidinal economy is mediated by technical systems. But mastery of the relation between nature and man is still mastery. How should we understand this? And could you elaborate a bit more on Benjamin's idea of technology and how you think it is useful in this context, since I'm not that familiar with his thought of technology? Also, for instance, how does Benjamin's thinking differ from Heidegger's view of technology as essentially enframing, and why is it more productive here in your view to appeal to Benjamin rather than to Heidegger? Then a few smaller questions. You write, and I quote, "Let us imagine a technology."
Peter, maybe we should first give Frederik.
Sorry. Okay.
Time respond. There were a lot of questions that Frederik, please feel free to cherry pick which one you like, and then maybe turn this into a bit of more of a conversation. Then that be okay, Peter?
It's perfect for me. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I was almost finished, but yeah, please.
You can finish, Peter, because I was thinking you only had one day, but I cannot imagine like if you had like 1 week or like more than 1 day, because no, really, I want to write a text based on your questions. I want to write a text based on that. I like to take it as really an agenda for an article. I'm totally serious. So can you finish? Can you finish? Because I want the conclusion. I'm serious.
Okay. Well, let's skip.
If you want, it's just because like I was following you, so I was like seeing your thoughts. Yeah. So I want to see the target, the final.
I must apologize for interrupting that.
No, Jochem, don't. I just say I'm totally into what Peter says.
No, but I don't want to claim all the time because there's still an audience waiting. So one last thing. Could you please tell us more about your love for the cosmos that you preach, this cosmophilia? How should we understand, given the fact that geophilia, as you could call it, is not enough in your view? That's what I sense of all your writings. And could you relate this to your understanding of the Earth, neither as an object nor as a subject, but as a traject, as you develop in the unconstructible Earth, and you called us accidental beings very beautifully in your paper today. Should we realize that we are not simply earthlings, earthbound terrans, as Latour and Viveiros de Castro call it, but that we are somehow strangers on this earth, to put it with Rilke? And how could we give shape to our awareness of being cosmic beings rather than earthly beings? And is, in your view, our ultimate destiny rather than terrestrial, cosmic rather than terrestrial? And again, how should this cosmic awareness reflect itself in the way we relate to the planet? And how should we respect, and that is to say technologically, as technological and technologically conditioned creatures, the Earth's strangeness, alterity, uncontrollability, and unconstructability, as you call it. Let's finish here.
Thank you. It's always a weird experience when we listen to someone who completely understood what you have said and who are also able to see the problems and the unsolved problems and the problematic points. So thank you so much. I totally thought what I said before, that there is for me a frame to write an article. I will begin with an important statement of Jacques Lacan, psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. Mm-hmm. There is no big other. Il n'y a pas de grand autre. There is no big other. It is only in a paranoid kind of discourse that the other becomes consistent, and we give a name to this big other. It can be the Jewish people. It can be the transhumanist corporation. It can be Muslim people. It can be extraterrestrial beings. You know, you can imagine always to give a name to the big other and to imagine it consistent is a theoretical, is a political, of course, disaster, but is also a theoretical weakness. So by that, I mean that to describe the birth of what I call ecofascism, we don't need any plot. We don't need that. It's for pragmatic reasons that, in a way, some democratic leaders are going to become eco-fascist. To say that in another way, what I say during this talk is that when I was speaking about Polanyi, I said, you know, nowadays, if we want to understand fascism, we first need to think about ecology, not liberalism. To say that is to insist on the fact that we cannot understand what I call ecofascism as a pure way to hide something. There is nothing to hide. The ecological situation is disastrous. I will return to this term in a moment. So, in a way, there will be some pragmatic reasons, you know, to be careful with energy, water, any sort of scarcity. So there is nothing to hide. Like we can imagine that even Marine Le Pen is affected by the ecological situation. So I'm not trying to reveal a sort of a secret plot. Everything is in plain air, in plain sight, right? The eco-fascist kind of governmentality is going on for pragmatic reasons. So that's super important for me to get rid of any sort of big otherness of people can think about what they want, you know, they can imagine to upload their brain in a computer or but they do not dominate destiny. Nobody is able to control the volcano called Earth. So what I mean by that is that each time there is a restructuring in governmentality or at the level of an existential form of life, at the level of the individual, we have to deal with new elements and we have to recompose something based, of course, of some previous programs, anticipations. Each time there is a new configuration. And this is this new configuration that we need to understand now. We don't need, it's like, comment dit-on, like the Occam's razor. Like, you know, we don't need this hypothesis to understand what the reason for which Macron is behaving the way he behaves. We don't need that, actually. There are some elements that we need to identify thanks to historians and philosophers. But these threads have to be recombined because of contingent events. Second, we go, comment dire ça, we go to the wall, we are going to crash. It's such a short thing. When? I don't know. What I try to say is that I think it's not a good idea. The problem is to turn scientific facts again into a program, comment dire, the problem is to confuse the factuality of science and to turn that into a destiny. We have to get rid of the idea of destiny. A destiny is always something, when we speak in terms of destiny, it is because we are not able to laugh at it in a way. I'm not sure that I want this sentence to be recorded, but it is said. Destiny is a misunderstanding of tragedy. Something like that. It's something misunderstood in this idea that, okay, what I try to say is that the fact that a part of the Earth is collapsing is a fact, but we cannot base our politics on that. The problem is to pass from this science to a political decision without thinking precisely the decision at stake. So we should not turn science into a destiny, right? So I don't know, I wanted to say something about that, about the fact that the problem I see, I just published a little text in L'Obs, a French kind of magazine, in which I said something like, it's too late for the end of the world, but not too early to begin it again. We should not use collapsology or this kind of discourse as a guide. It's a bad guide. It leads to precisely ecofascism. Also, not only, of course, but also. It should not be a guide. It should be a fact, a part of our decision, but it should not be the way through which we imagine the future. Concerning conspiracy theory, you know, I'm working on two projects. One is a book that I call from 5 years, The Planetary Condition, but the more I work on it, the more I see that this expression is used by many people since 2015, UQE, but also there is a book called The Planetary Turn, written by two people, I don't remember their names, but the introduction of their book is called The Planetary Condition. But so there is this book on the planetary condition, and there is another project that I call for the moment After the Metaverse. Precisely the same idea, to not be determined by what we're supposed to be our destiny. So let's think, you know, we are already after the metaverse. And so my goal is to understand conspiracy theory as a symptom of a certain kind of illness. And this illness concerns communication. I think nowadays the goal is not to create a new conspiracy. what we need to do is to rethink communication, right? So what I try to say is that I think nowadays we cannot use any longer the term conspiracy. It's impossible. What we need to do is precisely to rethink the condition of communication. And to rethink these conditions of communication implies something else than conspiracy. I jump to the third thing I wanted to say. Why? Okay. If you read the text of Yuki called Toward a Planetary Thinking, published in eFlux recently, 1 year ago.
I know.
He says, first, he endorses the interpretation of the Copernican revolution as a form of nihilism, like Heidegger. I think here there is a misinterpretation of the Copernican revolution that Nietzsche, Pascal, Freud, so many thinkers, developed. The idea that there is a split between a nihilistic cosmos and the Earth. In this text, Yuki speaks about a return to Earth as Latour. I argue for something different. What I try to say is that as long as we will consider our terrestrial ties as purely terrestrial, we will develop a form of ecophobia. What we need to understand is that in our terrestrial ties, there is a kind of otherness that relates us to, let's say, the cosmos. So the love for the cosmos is just an attempt to not confine us to the Earth, right? To avoid the enclosure, to not enclose ourselves to Earth. Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much. I want to briefly interrupt here because we have about 15 minutes left in this session, and I also want to open the floor to others. So thank you very much for this conversation. And if there's time left at the end, then maybe you can pick up on this now. But listening to your answer just now, Frédéric, I think a question from Bronislaw Szczerzinski. I probably butchered his name again, but I do it all the time. But I think it very nicely links up to what you just said. You can also read it in the chat if you like, but I will read it, and then Bronislaw, you can respond to Frédéric if you like. So he likes your account of planetary alliances involving a technology open to the terrestrial and the cosmos. But he says, as Stenger argued, the Copernican shift in fact dissolved the flawed earthly sublunary into the imagined perfect superlunary with its lawful predictability, rather than the other way around. So his question is, do we need a sublunary cosmic technology, a kind of return to antique ideas of techne?
Thank you for your question. In this book, Planetary Condition, let's say for the moment, I keep this title. There's a chapter called something like Galileo ecologist, something like that, to show that Galileo Galilei is the first ecological thinker. And the goal is to reinterpret, right, the Copernican revolution. And I think the first thing we need to understand, at least it was at play in the desires, the intentions, and the discourses of Kepler, Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, Tycho Brahe, and even Newton, maybe. The goal is to produce an elevation. I don't remember the term in English right now. The goal is not to dissolve the difference between the supralunary and the sublunary dimension. The first goal for them was not to produce the fall of the stars on the planets, but it was quite the opposite. The goal of these thinkers was to create what I call a celestial democracy. That is to say, really a celestial democracy, like to admit to admit the Earth as a star, to admit the Earth as a cosmological body. So we need to return to this first intention in order to rethink what we have done after that, and to rethink the ecological way of thinking as a reaction against a misinterpretation of the Copernican revolution as a nihilistic destruction of the difference between the supralunary and the sublunary. So first, we need to understand a kind of assumption that happened, at least in theory, 6 centuries ago, 7 centuries ago, 6. I'm lost right now in time. Sorry about that. But we need to return to that to create a retrospective bifurcation, right? What I call to become Copernican is to redeem a part of the astronomical revolution that is different from the mathematization of the Earth. I think there is a difference that we need to highlight between the astronomical revolution and the mathematical revolution. And I want to say the astronomical revolution.
All right, thank you very much. Brony, do you want to follow up on that, if you can? Unmute yourself and so on, if you're still here, actually.
Yeah, I'm still here. I won't say much, just to say thank you, and that was a really interesting reply, but I think I need to read and think about your ideas about this before I respond, you know, because these are, it's a very sort of subtle distinction you're making there, which I think is in some ways consistent with what I was saying, but you're sort of saying that the resources are already there in the Copernican revolution at the beginning. So yeah, I look forward to reading what you say about that. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. I actually also have a question myself. It's maybe more for clarification, but it goes to this concept that you close with, this idea of outer nationalism instead of internationalism, and you describe it as an internationalism without national hope. And I was wondering, what kind of meaning does this notion of nation still carry there? Maybe put a bit differently, couldn't one argue that nations, in the plural, enter into a kind of relation that you described previously as correspondence without fusion, and in that sense maybe confront the Earth as a dimension of alterity that you also mentioned? I would be interested to learn your views on this, which I think are, well, particularly relevant today now that we hear more and more talk of multipolarism and those kinds of things. So yeah, your thoughts on this would be appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Jochem. It's a way also to return to a question of Peter about eco-fascism and eco-socialism. So I think that the nation state is not able to deal with the ecological situation. I can put that this way. So if socialism implies a certain trust in the state, I cannot be a socialist in this sense. And if we think like really, if we think that socialism does not require the abolition of the state, I'm not a socialist. And not because they are bad people and like they have bad intentions. Again, for I sort of in a way I try to describe a pragmatic eco-fascism. It seems crazy, but it's what I want. It is what I wanted to, alas, to describe. I think that the level, the political level of the nation state is not able to deal with what is going on. So we need to go below and beyond the nation states. Below, we need to trust in the possibility of actions coming from people. And above that, we need a way to create, beyond the level of the nation state, we need to create some alliances, coalitions. I don't know what is the correct term. And so we have to go like beyond and above the nation state. in a way, I am on this level Marxist, you know, like I remember there was a symposium in Paris organized by Bernard Stiegler on internation, and I read something. I read the, you know, the text, Marx text about the creation of the first international, and the way it tries to make a distinction between state citizens and another form of belonging. Another form of belonging is not a national form of belonging. So I think we need to rethink a form of belonging that does not correspond to the level of the nation. And so what I try to say is that, yes, we need to find some correspondences below and beyond the level of nation. And I cannot do that alone. So like to think in terms of geocosmological belonging, like, you know, there is an expression that Peter used. Yeah, I think we are strangers on Earth. Absolutely, we are just strangers. And I think we need to find a place to symbolize this strangerness in our constitutions, in our laws. We need to do that. If it is a kind of poetry, it is a kind of poetry that needs its political translation. And it's not idealism, it's just a pure necessity. Sorry, I don't respond very well. I'm very sorry. I jump from one thing to another. But outer nationalism, because maybe there is still a term national, and I was not able to find another term, you know, fédération d'étrangeté. There is a beautiful expression of Julia Kristeva, federation of strangeness. She uses this expression somewhere. I love this expression, une fédération d'étrangeté, a federation of strangers or federation of strangerness. I don't know. From it means the same thing. It means really an attempt to think even technology as not determined by a form of nationalism. I don't believe that. I believe less and less that it's possible ontologically to determine certain regions of the world having a specific culture, a specific technology. I don't believe in that any longer. I believe that nations are always divided by different tensions. I don't believe that the West is naturalist. I don't believe that Brazilian people are animist. I don't believe in that. I believe in tension, in differences. I don't believe in identities at all, at all.
All right. Thank you very much for that. That was actually quite an illuminating answer. I'll have to think on this a bit more. Well, we discussed quite a bit of I would say also kind of political philosophy. So maybe it's nice. I see this question in the chat from Lorena Boer, who kind of moves it up to first philosophy, and maybe that's nice to close with that. Well, I can of course read the question, but Lorena, if you can also read it yourself, maybe you want to elaborate a little bit, and then we can have an answer to this question and close this session. Would that be okay?
Hello, yeah, thanks a lot. That would be okay. I was a bit wondering why Aristotle is your enemy in terms of history of philosophy. Maybe you could elaborate a bit or explain to me why do you think Aristotle is has a phobia of Earth, which I don't understand. As I have inquired the natural philosophy of Aristotle, he is really a cosmology and talks about heavenly bodies and unfolds a whole cosmology. So for me, rather the enemy seems to be Parmenides, or the Parmenidean position of the one, which you're attacking and which I entirely understand to attack, but it's not Aristotle. Maybe you could just clarify these great trajectories of thinking you're addressing.
No, thank you. You're completely right. Like the one is precisely, you're right. I have a sort of, I love the title of this, what is the name of, you know, Discours de la Boétie, you know, Discours de la servitude volontaire, Discourse on voluntary servitude. I'm sorry about the translation, but it was called Le Contre un. you know, against the one. So I love this as a title, le contraint. So yeah, I could write every subtitle of my, you know, every subtitle for my articles might be contraint. Contraint 1, contraint 2, against the one, against the one, 2. And so Parmenides, maybe, you're right about the enemy. Aristotle, I went too quickly. Because behind that, this sentence is a concentration of something. I have, in another text, I spoke about satellites and about this extra geological layer formed by satellites and decaying satellites. I want to write a chapter of this book, The Planetary Condition, on satellites. And I was thinking that in a way, this, you know, this geostationary level made with artifacts might be understood as a form of a new sublunary orb, something like that. So there is, I don't want to especially attack Aristotle, but I think I want maybe to consider, I want to analyze the environmental thought as Aristotelian in the sense of geocentric and still structured by a split between the Earth and the rest of the world. In the book of Bruno Latour called Où atterrir, Where Landing, I'm not sure about the translation in English. In one of his last books, I think he makes this distinction between, he says there is a, I don't remember the word, but everybody says the same thing, there is the Earth, and let's find another term for the rest, you know, like the cosmos or the universe. I don't remember the terms that he selected, but this division between the Earth and the cosmos implies a very strange acosmism, implies a very strange thought of the Earth, because if there is the Earth and the cosmos, where is the Earth, right? The Earth is in the cosmos. If not, we return to, and there is another thing about Aristotle. You know, when Galilei explained his intention, he says that what he wants to do is to save the Earth from because there are some, you know, geocentrism is not a good thing for you know, medieval thinkers from Aristotle. You know, geocentrism is a terrible situation, because when you are, okay, I don't want to develop that today, but there is a sort of despisal of the Earth in Aristotle. I mean, it is something that I would like to develop, because the Earth is also a place in which it is a sentient, it is a trash bin, like a trash bin. You know, Galileo Galilei says somewhere that the goal of the astronomical revolution is to turn the Earth into something else than a trash bin. So, okay, sorry, I'm you know, I have a cold, and now I think my brain is like collapsing, you know, before the collapse of the Earth.
All right, so I think that would actually be an excellent time to then call it quits for now, although I think you still have the remainder of the day to go through, but we're also out of time. Frédéric, I want to thank you again very much for your fascinating lecture. There are still some other questions in the chat as well that I can collect and send to you if you like. Maybe it gives you something to think about later.
Yes, please.
It was it was really it was really a pleasure having you here. I also want to thank Peter for your comments and everybody in the chat who participated. Let's see. Yeah, our next seminar is in 2 months, the 14th of March. Clive Hamilton will then be here to give a talk, you are of course all invited, but I will send around the necessary reminders and so on later. Frederic, any final words you want to leave us with for, well, here it's tonight, for some it might be today?
Well, I wanted to thank you. I didn't thank you. So first, thank you for an invitation. I see the comment of Bron. Yeah, you're right, totally right, Bron. I know your book because I've wrote, a review of your book, Bron. So I totally agree with what you say. Planetary multiplicity. I know this concept, and I know that you are working on that. I know your work, Bron, and the work of Nigel Clark. I have a sort of admiration for your work. So yes, I'm not alone. I'm just a part of a community of thinkers who try nowadays to rethink the Earth from a cosmological perspective. And Bron, you are doing that, and Bron is doing that. And there is a marvelous article of Bron on planetary drifting. I not exactly remember the title of your article, but I am a fan of your work. So thank you. I want to say thank you for everyone. Thank you for having been able to listen to me despite of my cold.
Thanks a lot.
All right, great. So let's close there. I hope you will feel better, Frederic. Yeah, thanks again, everybody. The recording will be made available in due course. I will keep you posted. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.